The wind screamed across the cliffs of Virelia like a living thing, bending the jagged rocks and whipping dust into the faces of those below. Clouds churned violently above, casting dark shadows over the struggling human colony clinging to the edge of the alien world. The storm was relentless, a harsh reminder that Virelia was not forgiving to the weak or careless. Lieutenant Kyle Ardan moved steadily through the gusting wind, his boots finding hold on the slick, uneven ground. He was calm, almost unnervingly, so even as the storm tried to tear everything around him apart, Kale's eyes, sharp and deliberate, scanned the jagged cliffs. Somewhere up there, amid the chaos, was Dr. Selina Mira. The colony had received an emergency alert. She had been conducting a solo survey of the cliffs when a sudden tremor caused part of the terrain to collapse. Kale knew the cliffs better than anyone. He had walked them countless times, climbing the rocky outcrops to check equipment, to rescue stragglers, and to make sure the colony's fragile buildings did not topple into the void below. But this storm was different. It was wild, almost alive, and it pushed against him with a force that demanded attention. Still, he moved forward, ignoring the wind, ignoring the shaking ground, focusing only on one thing: finding Celine. Celine had always been confident, capable, brilliant. She had built much of the colony's infrastructure, designed machines that kept the harsh environment at bay, and solved problems that had stumped others for months. But Kale knew that even the strongest people could falter when faced with sheer danger. And right now she was trapped somewhere up there alone, fighting both the storm and her own fear. He spotted a flash of movement on a high ledge, a small figure hunched, gripping a survey tool like it was a lifeline. That was her, Celine Mira. Kyle pushed forward, keeping his footing despite the wind and mud, his mind calculating the safest path to her. Another tremor shook the cliff, and small stones rained down, bouncing off his armor. He gritted his teeth and moved faster. When he reached the ledge, he could see the panic in her eyes. The storm had torn the support cables from her platform, and the rocks beneath her feet were loose, shifting dangerously. One wrong move, and she could fall to her death. "Celine," Kale called, raising his voice against the wind. "Hold still. I'm coming." Her head snapped toward him, eyes wide with fear. She opened her mouth to speak, but a gust of wind drowned out her words. She tried to move to reach the higher ledge where she could find better footing, but the cliff beneath her cracked, sending a small avalanche of rocks tumbling down. Kale didn't rush. He knew that in moments like this, panic was more dangerous than the storm itself. Instead, he moved carefully, positioning himself between her and the crumbling edge. His arms were outstretched, ready to catch her if she slipped. But he didn't grab her immediately. He didn't take over. He just stood there steady, a wall of calm in the chaos. "Breathe, Celine," he shouted. "Just breathe. You've done this before. You can do it again." Her eyes flicked to him, searching for hope, for a solution. But Kale didn't offer one in words. He offered presence. He offered patience. He offered trust. The wind screamed louder, as if challenging them, testing their resolve. Celine's hands shook as she gripped the rocky ledge. Her mind raced. Every mistake she had made, every failure, every time she had felt weak. She felt the weight of it all now, in the storm, on the cliff, in her bones. She wanted to cry out, to scream, to give up. But Kale was there, not grabbing, not commanding, just holding her space, letting her know she was not alone. "You don't have to do this alone," Kale said, his voice steady. "But you have to do it yourself. I can't move the cliff for you." The words hit her strangely. He wasn't saving her. He wasn't solving the problem. He was letting her see what she could do. And for the first time in hours, maybe days, Celine felt the smallest spark of clarity. She could move. She could survive. She could climb. Her hands dug into the wet rock. She tested the ledge, shifting her weight slowly, carefully, finding the points that could support her. Kyle stayed with her, his eyes never leaving hers, silent encouragement in every breath he took. A rock dislodged above them, tumbling down like a missile. Celine froze. Kale's hand shot out, catching her elbow just in time. "You've got this," he said. I'm right here. It wasn't the words that helped. It was the fact that he didn't take control. He didn't pull her away. He just held her until she remembered what she had almost forgotten, her own strength. Selene swallowed hard. She could do this. She had to. She had survived worse on Virelia. She had faced storms, cliffs, and predators. She had faced the impossible before. She could face it again. Slowly, carefully, she moved her foot to a more stable rock, then another. Kale mirrored her, steadying himself but never taking over. Each step was a victory, a small reclaiming of the confidence she had lost. The storm raged around them, but within that chaos a rhythm formed, a rhythm of movement, of breath, of trust in her own body. Hours, or maybe minutes, time blurred by fear and adrenaline, passed like this. Selene climbed, Kyle beside her, a silent partner in a dance of survival. At one point she slipped slightly, heart leaping, but Kale's hand was there, guiding her without taking control. "You're stronger than you think," he said. Not as praise, not as a lecture, just as fact. Selene nodded, letting the truth of it sink in. She had been relying on others for validation, for help, for guidance, but the real strength had always been within her. Kale's role wasn't to save her. It was to remind her of that truth when she couldn't see it herself. The storm began to ease, the wind losing some of its fury. The clouds still churned above, but the path forward became clearer. Selene's muscles ached, her clothes were soaked and torn, and the cuts on her hands stung. But she was moving, alive, and in control. Kyle glanced at her, a quiet pride in his eyes. Not pride for himself, but for her. He had done his job. He had been the anchor, the presence, the steady hand. The rest, her survival, her courage, her strength, was hers. Finally, Selene reached a ledge that offered more stability, a place where she could catch her breath without fear of falling. She sank to her knees, exhausted but victorious. Kale kneeled beside her, offering water from his canteen. She drank, shaking, tears mixing with rain on her cheeks. You didn't save me," she whispered, voice trembling. "No," Kyle replied. "I didn't. I held you, that's all. You did the rest." Selene looked at him, really looked at him, and for the first time, she saw the quiet power of human resilience reflected in another human being. She had thought strength came from outside, from machines, from rules, from rescue, but it came from within. And sometimes all someone needed was a steady hand, a calm presence, someone who believed in them until they remembered their own power. The storm continued to rage in the distance, but for a moment, all was still. Two humans on a dangerous cliff, battered by nature, yet alive, not because one had saved the other, but because one had reminded the other of her own strength, and that was more powerful than any storm. The storm had passed, but the cliffs of Virelia were still treacherous. Rain-slicked rocks glimmered under the faint light of the moon, and the wind whispered warnings as if the planet itself were testing their will. Selene Mira sat on the ledge, breathing heavily, her hands scraped and bleeding from gripping the rocks. Beside her, Lieutenant Kale Arden remained vigilant, his eyes scanning the surrounding darkness. "You okay?" he asked quietly. His voice was calm, but the concern in his eyes was unmistakable. Selene wiped the rain from her face and shook her head. I think so. But this place, it's too much." Kyle didn't respond immediately. He understood that words were less important than presence, so he just sat quietly beside her, letting the silence speak. In that quiet, Selene began to feel something she hadn't in a long time, a spark of clarity. The fear was still there, sharp and biting, but beneath it, she could sense her own strength rising. "You know," Kale said after a few moments, breaking the silence, "humans have survived far worse than this. Tsunamis, earthquakes, volcanoes, wars. The storm is big, but you're bigger." Selene laughed bitterly. "That's easy to say. You've never been alone on a cliff looking down at the abyss thinking you might die." Kale didn't flinch. "I have been scared, and I have been alone. But fear doesn't mean weakness. Fear means you're alive, and alive means you can fight." Selene looked at him, trying to absorb the truth in his words. She had spent months doubting herself, questioning whether she belonged on Virelia, whether her skills were enough to keep the colony alive. Now, facing death on a cliff, she realized that those doubts were unnecessary. She was capable. She was strong. She just had to remember how to act. Kyle stood and extended his hand to her. "Come on, we can't stay here. The cliff isn't stable, and night predators are attracted to movement." Selene hesitated, looking down at the ledge. The drop was dizzying, and the path ahead looked even more dangerous. But Kale's calm presence reassured her, not because he would save her, but because he trusted that she could handle it herself. She took his hand and stood, knees shaking. "All right," she said, voice steadying. "Let's do this." They began moving carefully along the ledge, Selene leading the way. Kale stayed just behind her, a steady support but never taking over. Each step was deliberate, each handhold checked before she trusted it. The cliff groaned under their weight, loose stones sliding into the darkness below. Every muscle in her body screamed to stop, to retreat, to collapse in exhaustion. But she kept moving, each step a small victory over fear. After a short distance, the cliff narrowed, forcing them to walk single file. Selena glanced at Kale. "I don't know if I can do this," she admitted. Kale shook his head. "You already are. You're just not giving yourself credit yet." The path grew worse. A section of the cliff had collapsed completely, leaving a jagged gap. Selene crouched and assessed it. The drop was too far to jump safely, and the ledge on the other side was slippery. She could feel panic rising again, but Kale's presence reminded her to breathe, to focus. "I can use the rope from my harness," Selene said, pulling a coil of climbing rope from her pack. "I can secure it to the anchor points and make a bridge." Kyle nodded. "I'll follow your lead." Selene tied the rope carefully, checking each knot, testing the strength before taking a step. She felt the adrenaline surge through her, sharpening her senses. Her hands were cold, numb from the rain, but her mind was clear. She could do this. She would do this. With Kyle watching, she inched across the gap, muscles straining, heart racing. The wind tried to push her sideways and rocks crumbled beneath her boots. But step by step she crossed the gap, her determination stronger than her fear. When she reached the other side, she looked back at Kale. "You can do it," she said. Kale smiled, silently proud. He followed her, crossing the rope bridge without complaint, trusting her judgment entirely. Once across, they continued along the cliff, moving slower now. The rain had stopped, but the ground was still wet and treacherous. Small alien creatures, drawn by the scent of blood and the vibrations of movement, began to stir in the shadows. Kale noticed their glowing eyes in the darkness and tightened his grip on his weapon. "Selene," he whispered. "We have company." Selene's eyes widened, but she didn't panic. Instead, she scanned her surroundings and noticed narrow crevices and outcroppings that could provide cover. "Follow me," she said, voice firm. "We can use the rocks to hide, then make a run for the lower plateau." Kale followed, impressed. Selene wasn't just surviving. She was leading. The fear that had paralyzed her earlier had been replaced by strategy and action. Every step she took reminded her of her own resilience, and Kale stayed close, offering guidance only when necessary. The alien predators, a mix of Virelia's native fauna, were fast and relentless. Their claws scraped the rocks, and their low growls echoed through the canyon. Selene ducked into a crevice, crouching low, her mind calculating their next move. Kyle did the same, covering her. "On my mark," Selene whispered. She had spotted a narrow path leading down to the plateau, a route the predators couldn't reach. "We run together and we don't stop." Kale nodded. "Got it." Selene counted silently to 3 and then leaped from the crevice onto the path. Kale followed immediately, keeping pace with her. The predators lunged, but Selene had anticipated their moves, using the terrain to slow them down. She felt the thrill of danger, the rush of survival, and the undeniable proof that she could handle herself. Halfway down the path, the cliff trembled. Rocks tumbled, forcing them to jump and dodge. Kale extended his hand, steadying her as she leapt to safety. "You're stronger than you think," he said again. Selene didn't answer. She just kept moving, letting each step be an affirmation of her strength. She had learned something vital. The moment she doubted herself, the moment she relied entirely on others, was when danger could consume her. But when she trusted her own mind, her own body, her own courage, then she could survive anything. Finally, They reached the lower plateau. Celine collapsed to her knees, exhausted but victorious. Kyle sat beside her, sharing a quiet moment of relief. The predators had not followed, deterred by the difficult terrain and Celine's clever maneuvers. "You did it," Kyle said softly. "All of it. Not me. You." Celine looked at him, breath coming in heavy gasps. I really did," she whispered, awe in her voice. She had faced the storm, the cliff, and the predators, and she had emerged alive because she had remembered her own strength. Kale smiled, a quiet warmth in his eyes. "You remembered. That's all I ever wanted you to do." Celine laughed softly, the sound mingling with the distant echo of the storm's fading roar. She felt powerful, capable, and alive, not because someone had saved her, but because she had saved herself, with Kale's presence as a reminder that she wasn't alone in her fight. The moon broke through the clouds, casting a soft silver light across the plateau. Celine stood slowly, feeling the ache in her muscles and the sting of her cuts, but also the thrill of survival. She looked at Kale and nodded. "Let's get back to the colony. I think I can lead the way now." Kale nodded in agreement, silently recognizing the transformation he had witnessed. Celine was no longer the unsure engineer clinging to survival. She was a force of human determination, intelligence, and courage. She had remembered who she was, and that memory was stronger than any storm, any predator, any challenge Virelia could throw at her. As they moved forward toward the colony, Celine's steps were steady, confident. She had been tested, she had been afraid, but she had overcome. And Kale walked beside her, not as a rescuer, but as a witness to the human spirit at its finest. A spirit that could endure, adapt, and thrive. Even in the most alien and hostile world, the cliffs behind them were dangerous, wild, and unforgiving. But Celine no longer feared them. She had faced herself and emerged stronger. And in that she realized the true power of humanity, the ability to rise, to fight, and to remember the strength that had always been within. The morning sun crept over the horizon, casting a pale golden light across Virelia's jagged cliffs. The storm had passed, leaving the world glistening with rain and dew, but the landscape remained harsh, unwelcoming. Celine Mira stood at the edge of the lower plateau, her muscles sore, her clothes torn and wet, but her spirit stronger than ever. Beside her, Lieutenant Kale Arden moved with the same quiet vigilance that had kept them alive through the storm and the treacherous cliffs. "This is it," Celine said, her voice calm but resolute. "From here we can make it back to the colony." Kyle nodded, trusting her judgment completely. He had been with her through fear, through uncertainty, and now he saw the transformation. She was no longer the unsure engineer trapped on the cliff. She was a leader in her own right, a survivor, a human who understood her own power. The path ahead was not easy. The plateau narrowed into a winding canyon littered with jagged rocks, steep drops, and unstable terrain. Virelia's native predators, curious and persistent, could still be nearby. But Celine did not hesitate. She led the way, her mind calculating the safest route, her body moving with purpose. "Keep close," she instructed, glancing back at Kale. "Watch the footing. If anything moves, signal me immediately." Kale obeyed without question. He had witnessed her courage, her focus, her skill, and he knew that she could guide them both safely if they trusted her entirely. The first challenge came quickly. A narrow ledge stretched across a deep ravine, the only way forward. Below, the rocks jutted sharply, a fall that would have been fatal. Celine examined the ledge, testing the stone with her boots. It was slippery, wet from the previous storm, but solid enough if she moved carefully. "Follow me exactly," she said, and began to cross. Kale followed, step by step. His eyes never left hers, ready to assist, but he let her lead. She inched across the ledge, muscles tight, mind focused. Halfway across, a loose stone shifted, threatening to send her tumbling. Without hesitation, she adjusted, shifting her weight and gripping the ledge firmly. Kale mirrored her movements, impressed by her balance and control. When they reached the other side safely, Celine exhaled deeply. "See? We can do this," she said, a hint of a smile breaking through. But Virelia was not done testing them. Ahead, the canyon narrowed further, and movement in the shadows revealed the predators had not given up. 4 creatures, sleek and fast, with glowing eyes and sharp claws, emerged from the rocks. They were clearly hungry, and the storm had driven them out of their usual hunting grounds. Celine crouched, assessing their position. "We have to move fast. I can create a diversion with rocks and draw them away while we slip past, she whispered. Kyle's eyes widened slightly. Do it, he said, knowing she had thought it through. Selene picked up a loose stone and threw it into a narrow crevice, the sound echoing through the canyon. The predator's attention snapped toward the noise. She threw a second, then a third, drawing them toward the shadows while she guided Kale along a safer path. Step by careful step, they moved past the predators. Selene's heart pounded, but her mind was clear. Each movement, each decision was hers. Kale followed, silent and supportive, watching the human's natural instinct for survival at work. Finally, the predators lost interest, returning to their hidden dens in the rocks. Selene allowed herself a brief pause. Her hands shook slightly, but not from fear, from exhilaration. She had done it. She had led, planned, and acted. She had faced the danger and come out alive. Kale looked at her, a quiet admiration in his eyes. You never needed me to save you, he said. You just needed me to stay with you. Selene smiled, feeling a warmth spread through her despite her exhaustion. And you did, but now I can take us home. The rest of the canyon was narrow and jagged, but Selene's focus never wavered. She found stable footholds, used her engineering knowledge to test the safety of ledges, and guided Kale through paths even the predators would struggle to follow. Every step reinforced her confidence. Every obstacle overcame reminded her that humans were not just fragile beings struggling against nature. They were adaptable, intelligent, and resilient. Hours seemed to pass in minutes as they navigated the final stretch. Selene's legs ached, her hands were raw from gripping rocks, and her body was drenched in sweat and rain. But the sight of the colony in the distance, tiny buildings clinging to the cliffs, the faint morning lights, gave her a renewed surge of energy. They were close. One last challenge remained, a steep slope leading directly into the colony's courtyard. Loose rocks and mud made it almost impossible to descend without slipping. Selene scanned the path, then looked at Kale. I'll go first. Watch my moves and follow exactly. Kale nodded, knowing that she had carefully calculated each step. Selene lowered herself slowly, testing each foothold, moving with precision. Kale followed, matching her pace exactly, trusting her guidance. Halfway down, a small rock gave way, sending a shower of stones crashing below. Kale steadied her with a gentle hand, not taking control, just providing the support she needed. Selene adjusted quickly, her focus unbroken, and continued down the slope. Finally, they reached the courtyard. Selene sank to her knees, exhausted but victorious. The ground beneath her was solid, familiar, and safe. Kale crouched beside her, offering water and a hand to steady her. You did it, Kale said softly. Every step, every decision. You did it all. Selene looked around at the colony, at the people beginning to stir as they noticed the storm had passed. She realized something profound. It had not been Kale's strength that had saved her. It had been her own. He had held her through fear, yes, but he had never carried her. He had reminded her of what she already possessed. I remembered, she whispered. I remembered who I am. Kale smiled, the faintest of proud nods. That's all anyone can ask for. The colony workers began to gather near the edge, worried faces softening as they saw Selene and Kale emerge. Children peeked from behind their parents, inspired by the bravery they had witnessed. Selene felt a surge of human pride, not for herself alone, but for what humans could achieve when they faced impossible odds. One of the engineers approached, carrying supplies. We feared the worst, he said, voice trembling. But you made it. Both of you. Selene smiled, shaking off the mud and rain. We made it because we trusted each other. And because I trusted myself. Kale placed a hand on her shoulder. And that's the point. Humans survive, not because we are invincible, but because we can find strength we didn't know we had, especially when someone stands beside us. Selene's eyes met Kyle's, and she nodded. That quiet understanding, the unspoken bond forged in the storm, on the cliff through fear, was more powerful than any weapon, more enduring than any technology. Humans had survived Virelia's storm because they were capable, intelligent, and resilient. And sometimes all it took to remember that was a steady hand beside you. The colony cheered as Selene and Kale returned. They had faced the storm, the cliffs, the predators, and survived. But more than survival, they had shown what humanity could achieve. Courage, ingenuity, and unwavering spirit. Selene looked out over the cliffs, sunlight glinting on the jagged rocks. She remembered the fear, the panic, the doubt. And she smiled. She had faced herself, embraced her own strength, and emerged stronger. Kale stood beside her, silent but proud. "You didn't need saving," he said quietly, echoing what she already knew. Selene nodded, feeling a warmth deep in her chest. "No," she said. "I just needed to remember my own strength. And you helped me do that." The wind of Virelia whispered around them, but it no longer felt threatening. It felt alive, like the planet itself recognized their triumph. Selene had remembered her power. She had reclaimed it fully. And in that moment, she knew that humans, fragile, determined, intelligent humans could face anything, rise above it, and inspire the generations that followed. And that was a triumph far greater than survival.